Thanks for joining us for Chapter 19, Part 2, as we continue our look at immigration, industrialization, and urbanization. In our previous episode, we took a look at the reasons immigrants were coming to the United States and where they were moving. And what we saw was this increase in urbanization as more and more people were moving to the cities in search for a job in these industrial centers. And as more people flocked to the cities, conditions deteriorated. And this kind of came to light when Jacob Riis published his book, How the Other Half Lives, in 1890. And he went around talking about it and showing people pictures that he had taken, and he exposed the people to the absolute horrid living conditions that these city folk were living in. And as these families then crowded into these single room apartments in these dumbbell tenements that we had talked about in the previous lesson, you can see how truly filthy and crowded they were, how disease would run rampant. It was just filthy, and there was a stench, a foul smell that just filled the air, creating quite unhealthy, unsafe living conditions. In fact, in this picture, you see kind of this family's fuel supply for the winter. The stacked wood off in the corner of a room, as most of these places didn't have running water or electricity in the rooms. But they got the daylight from their windows, or they had to share a bathroom, or if it had running water at all. But if the firewood stored in an apartment isn't fire hazard enough, by having these apartments and tenements crammed so close and in fact touching each other, if a fire did start to spread, you can imagine how quickly it would engulf city blocks, making it very difficult and dangerous for people to live and go about their daily lives. And as you crowded more people in these tight areas, and as the skyscrapers and apartments grew taller, obviously, more and more of the sunlight's kind of cut out as these buildings, shoot high up into the sky. Some families actually had to live in basements or alleyways and would be exposed to other dangers. And as you get more people living here in these cities and crowded into cramped areas, not only do you have the health conditions, but you also have an increase in crime and other dangers that people would have to look out for. And with all the crime and filth, life expectancy was only kind of around 43, 44 years of age, and sometimes the stench and foul smell would be caused by the uncleanliness of the cities, including horse manure, which might be stacked up 2, 3, 4 feet high in these alleyways and in streets, as there was nowhere to put animal or even human waste. But eventually, after exposing these ills, city governments do build water and sewer lines, parks and playgrounds, and do pave streets. And eventually we see the life expectancy increase to 47, 48, 49 years as these conditions are improved. But this is something that we'll take a look at in future chapters. Another person that exposed some of the ills of this time was Lewis Hine, and he was famous for taking pictures or photographs of child labor. As children were often hired as they were easier to control, they would be paid less. Their smaller hands and fingers could kind of fit into the tight areas quicker to pull out some cotton if it got balled up or stuck, or fix some broken threads or whatever it might be. But you can see how young these kids were that were sent to these textile factories and other places of work. And you might also find little kids working as newsies, selling newspapers out on corners of streets, which could be dangerous because they're outside in all weather, when it's dark outside, and they'd be exposed to other social evils or ills of the time and other crime. Or you can see in the top picture working with seafood. But many of these kids during this time had little to no schooling, and malnutrition kind of ran rampant. There was a lack of exercise, which would stunt their growth and cause other health issues. In fact, they were even sent down deep into mines like coal mines and stuff, and as they breathe in these, you know, fumes or dust, even if they worked in textile factories, breathing in all the cotton fibers and stuff, all these different jobs had health effects and would cause respiratory issues or other issues. But many poor families eventually actually resented the expanded education efforts that eventually take place because they thought that by sending their kids off to school, it just took away, needed money to try to provide for the family and bring the basic necessities like a food and a place to stay. So they actually depended upon their child's labor to help make ends meet. And you may not be able to guess what this job is, but they're actually, these boys are rolling cigars. And as you can see, just like in textile factories, these workers would be closely supervised by somebody. And here you can see the older boy, with almost like a club or a stick. And they would make sure that they kept pace. They were working fast enough, doing their job, stayed on task, not even allowed to talk or take breaks unless they were told. And, just to kind of point out here as well, you can kind of see that even though they're working inside, it must be rather cold as they're all wearing coats and gloves and hats. And, I can imagine that the only light is coming through the windows and it's not heated. And so here you'd be working, toiling away your days on end, rolling these cigars for very little pay. But even with Lewis Hine exposing people to this child labor issue, it won't be quite some time until child labor laws are actually passed. And obviously today, for those of you that have jobs, you know that there are rules and regulations depending on how old you are and how many hours you can work and how late you can work and what type of conditions or things you can or can't handle. That kind of all stems from this industrialization era when those rules didn't exist.